So please keep these two cases, these two possibilities in mind as we discuss the following 4 aspects of stakeholder engagement: identifying and engaging stakeholders, national mirror committees, or NMCs, building national consensus, and participation in ISO committees. As we discuss these 4 aspects, we will show you where they come up in the steps we just discussed in the 2 cases. Now, let's start with identifying and engaging stakeholders. Identifying and engaging stakeholders comes up in the steps highlighted in yellow in the slide. Certainly when you don't have an existing national structure and need input to decide whether or not to get involved in new work, you'll need to identify and engage stakeholders. But even if you have an existing structure, it might be necessary to reach out to other stakeholders if you feel that there is a gap. Similarly, if you are a P member of a committee, in case 2, discussed in the previous slides, you may need to seek out additional stakeholders. So the first step is to identify potential stakeholders. The second one is to provide information on the new project. After, you will use the collected input to decide on participation and develop your national consensus position. But we will get into these later. To find stakeholders, at a minimum, you should look for stakeholders that are most likely to be directly affected by the subject matter of the work in question. This isn't always easy, but the information you need to assess the nature of the stakeholders who could be interested should be indicated in the proposal for the new work. Whether you use checklists of the types of potentially interested organizations or stakeholder categories like the ones that were mentioned earlier, the more broadly you cast your net, the better. Once you have identified the stakeholders who are most likely to be interested in the subject, there are 2 possible approaches you can take: the proactive approach and the passive approach. The proactive approach entails active outreach and communication to the stakeholders most likely to be interested. This can take many forms. You could, of course, email or call them, but here are additional means that came out of the survey conducted by the Technical Management Board. Send information packages. Hold workshops or seminars or information meetings. Launch a survey. Include an item on the agenda about the ISO work in an existing regular meeting. Ask to be invited to the organization's meetings to discuss the new work. Contact trade ministries. Use iSolutions. Look for stakeholders amongst existing customers of your web store. The passive approach is equally important because you might be able to reach a bigger audience with potentially fewer resources. For example, you could post information on your website, publish an article in a general newspaper, publish an article in a specialized magazine or other publication. Wait until the work has begun. More stakeholders may become interested. Basically, the principle is to think about how and where you are most likely to reach your targeted stakeholders. Consideration of which information will be relevant and how it should be made accessible to your targeted stakeholders is key. This is your sales pitch. In other words, what would the involvement bring to them? You should be able to explain the context of the work at the international level, including by explaining ISO and the NSB's involvement. But you should also be able to explain the national context. This can include a discussion of the economic priorities, how this impacts the stakeholder groups, any relevant trade agreements, or any relevant legislation. You may also need to explain various aspects of ISO and your NSB processes. Do you have a strategic plan? Do you have an advisory process? And if so, what is it? Do you have steering committees? Do you have oversight or approval processes? We recognize that there are real-life challenges in fulfilling the above, such as resources. You may find the perfect stakeholder, but they don't have the resources to participate. These are real concerns, and the solutions to this problem will differ depending on your national context. For example, you may wish to seek out government funding or other sponsorship. There is also limited funding available from ISO-CS for developing countries. More information on this can be obtained from ISO CS through your technical program manager.